In June of 2017, New America Public Interest Technology launched the Financial Inclusion and Citizen Participation Project with support from the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth. The Financial Inclusion and Citizen Participation Project, or FI&CP, utilizes an innovative model to examine public and private participation geographic information systems, or P3GIS, to evaluate the economic potential of low-income neighborhoods that have not received adequate social or economic investment. The FI&CP project is examining these issues in the case studies of the Bronx, Chicago, St. Louis, and in New Orleans. The P3GIS model will focus on evaluating financial impacts of housing starts that are community-led, with support from the municipality and technical services through a university or institute. A unique aspect of the FI&CP project is that the private sector, specifically MasterCard, will provide geospatial tools to examine results from anonymized and aggregated financial transactions. Communities may be able to understand and influence development of financial tools and services if there is greater access to private market segmentation data. This data sometimes creates barriers to those financial services. In the spring of 2018, the FI&CP project designed a P3GIS program in New Orleans with the Neighborhood Development Foundation. NDF is located in the Central City neighborhood of New Orleans, Louisiana. NDF started in 1985, but launched its first homebuyer education program in 1986. In the spring of 2018, NDF and the P3GIS project team examined 32 years of homebuyer education data. Mr. Fred Johnson Jr., CEO and Executive Director of NDF, will now share his experience and passion for providing an opportunity to those who dream to buy a house, creating a legacy and hope for a better future.
My name is Fred Johnson, and I'm the Executive Director of the New Orleans Neighborhood Development Foundation. I grew up in what's called the 7th Ward. It was very rich in a manner that everybody looked out for you and everybody knew who your parents were. It's an interesting story as to how I end up working, teaching and training first-time home buyers, because all of my life I didn't grow up hearing the mortgage was due. I grew up hearing the rent was due. And the truth of the fact is, in my particular household, we all were poor. We just didn't embrace it like that. But we were poor. We weren't homeowners. We were renters. And my particular scenario, we could be here till next week, but in my particular scenario, my dad was self-employed, and he was a fruit vendor, but he had two vices. He was a heroin addict, and he played a game that's known to New Orleans as Koch. And every day he made cash money. I often tell my siblings, had my dad been the kind of man who didn't take all the money but left some money in the house, we probably, and I'm the oldest of 6, we would have probably been pretty damn middle class. Mm-hmm. That always stood in my mind, right? And I'm saying, wow, man, if my dad would have just left $50, $60 on the table every week, you know what I mean? No matter what he did, if he'd have left that money. That forced us to always having to rent. And then one occasion happened that really broke the back on it was my grandmother and my mom got into it on a Christmas Eve because we lived in the other half of the house. And my grandmother, I love her to this day. Back then they was drinking, the table wine was Morgan David. They was drinking Morgan David wine and drinking Dixie beer, and we had Dixie Regals, Falstaff, all local beers. So it was time for my dad to give my mom the money to pay the rent, and he had to short the money. So one thing led to another. My mom met my grandma at the back fence, at the back gate, and my mom gave my grandmother the money, and she said, "Eva, the money is short." My mom said, "Well, Miss Mag, this is all the money I have." So my grandmother, you know, being a little tipsy, she said, "Well, y'all need to give me my money." So my mom said, "Well, if you would admit that your husband is a dope fiend, then you would know why you don't get your money." And my dad was right in the bathroom because it was a shotgun house. They just added that bathroom, the toilet part on to the back. So my grandmother took offense and says, "I tell you what you do, you take you and your damn children and you get out my house." So on a Christmas Eve, we going up the street with my mom came in the house and she said, "Listen, y'all get y'all shit, get it now." Because she told my grandmother, "That's what I'm gonna do. And I'm gonna get out your damn house." So on a Christmas Eve, we went up the street to my mom's mom, which was 2 blocks away. My mom didn't drive, and I think it was 4 of us at that time. All 4 of us had our things in our hand. And this is back when they had the aluminum Christmas tree, and you had the light that strobe around, right? Well, all my friends, you know, they getting ready for Christmas, and that stood, I'm soon to be 65, and I can't delete that, right? So my mom took the position that my daddy was my daddy, that was her husband, he's got a problem, but she was going to get us a project, and she would never put the rent in his name again. So we ended up moving into the Florida project, and she stayed there 17 years. And those are the kind of things that was harboring me about housing, about home ownership. And I would always tell my mom, I said, "Mom, I'm gonna buy your house. I'm gonna buy your house." Didn't know, didn't understand, didn't have a clue about how it was gonna come about. Working in the anti-drug program at Tambourine and Fan with Jerome Smith and Rudy Lombard, and Rudy says, "Hey man, I need to talk to you about supporting me to run for mayor. My brother was supposed to do it, but he didn't want to do it, so I'm gonna step up and do it." So I said, okay, and I was probably making $7,500 a year, what I was doing. He says, "And hopefully we can get you a better job than what you're doing." I said, "Fine." So one thing led to another. We didn't win the election, and we had this room full of data. So the question came up, what's gonna happen with this data? And so Tim said, "Why don't we start a home buyers training program?" And they said, "Well, what is that?" So one thing led to another. And my job was to understand, to create this brochure that separated the serious people from the not so serious people. We are a private nonprofit foundation, and the basis of what we were founded on was to educate first-time buyers how to go from home rent to home ownership. And the reason we want to do that, and the reason we need to do that, because in any city or any community, the more home ownership you have, the stronger that neighborhood is. What we try to tell all of the customers who come across the door, be it grants or not, education is the key to your success. What we're going to attempt to do over the next 12 hours is to educate you with regards to the biggest ticket item you'll ever buy. Buying a house is the biggest ticket item you'll ever buy. And the more you know about what you're doing, the better you can protect your money. You're going to hear about a lot of things, a lot of subject matters, a lot of information is going to get translated to you. Some of it I'm going to give. We're going to bring in other resource persons, they're going to give. But what I want you to understand in the very beginning of this, thanks. What I want you to appreciate in the very beginning of this is going to be about your money. Not Patricia's money, not Fred's money, not NDF's money, not even the mortgage company's money. Because once you sign, the smoke clear and the dust settle, you're going to be responsible. When the clientele completes the 12-hour course, they have a much broader scope about how this process works, who the players are, what the players do, what the players don't do, how they are to engage with them, and more importantly, how not to get ripped off. Right? So the data that we've picked, held on to through the years, says we have pretty close to 3,500 homeowners. Pulling all of these numbers together best we could, we going through an audit, and I just talked with the auditor, and he says, you know, Mr. Johnson, y'all got some pretty good numbers here. Well, I know the numbers there, but I don't study them. And he says, you know, you got 30%, you guys didn't pump from the numbers I'm looking at, 30% of $1 billion back into the economy. And I'm like, really? He says, yeah. I says, billion with a B? He says, yeah. Billion with a B. There's no other way to spell billion. I said, okay. And then when I got to thinking about it, I said, well, that's interesting because there are a lot of other categories that we haven't captured.
Not quantified, not started to measure in that sense.
Right. I mean, we haven't measured the level of insurance policies that's being purchased. We haven't measured the level of taxes that's being paid. We haven't measured the level of appliances, furnishings, just housekeeping manners. We haven't quantified the people who did the upgrades. Okay? We're going to educate you, stimulate you, motivate you, encourage you. We're going to help you to do what you came to do. But we don't help people who don't help themselves. It's not a welfare program, it's a self-help program. Okay? My passion is to help those who want to help themselves. If you're college degreed, come on in. If you a 9th grade dropout, come on in. What we know is that the schools and the churches and the institutions don't teach it, and it doesn't come by osmosis. So we have to find a way to continue it.